Hey everyone, this is Will Gibbons from willgibbonsdesign.com. If you don't know who I am, or you've never been to my website, maybe check it out if you got some free time. There you can learn what I'm all about, follow along with my blog, or check out my portfolio. I also have articles there that I write regularly, and fun little about section. So anyway, today what we're going to be doing is taking a look at how I put this image together here. This is the image I created for KeyShot 6 beta image contest just recently. And this is an image of an interior that I rendered out, and as you can see, it's actually a very high resolution image. And there's a bunch of cool KeyShot 6 features that I took advantage of to create this image. And today my intention is to kind of run you through my process of how I go about making images such as these, and maybe share with you a bit of my workflow and something that might be useful to you. So without any further ado, we will jump into this. So the first thing that I want to mention too is that I have no clue how long this video will run, but I intend to go through my whole process, so it might be a little while. And hopefully I am accurate and thorough, but anything can happen. So the first thing I do when I'm going to create an image is I kind of decide what the context, or what type of an image I want to create. In this case, I knew I wanted to create an interior, and I did not have time to model up something fully custom before the contest. So what I did is I went onto a few websites that I am showing you here to either buy or download for free 3D models that I could use in my scene. A couple things I should mention is that you should respect the copyright or the ownership of the artist who creates these models. You know, just because you can download something doesn't mean you're allowed to use it in any which way you please. So just be responsible and courteous in checking that out. But anyway, TurboSquid is a great website. For instance, if we search interiors, you can see they come up with a whole bunch of items, and a lot of these say that they are free because I have it sorted by lower price. You can kind of refine your search, and they have a huge library. Some great stuff, some, okay. And obviously, usually the nicer the model, the more you will pay for it. Also, we have CG Trader. So if I again search interior, you can see they have 31,226 models tagged with interior. And they even have models for 3D printing, which is pretty cool if that's what you're interested in. And then when we perform a search, we can also narrow it down if you want a model that's rigged or animated, etc. And again, these are, pay, some are free, but generally speaking, you can find some very nice high quality models here. GrabCAD is another website I use regularly. I don't know if you can sell anything on GrabCAD. I think it all may be free once you sign up for it. And again, to stay consistent, I'll search interior, and you can see there are a few items here. GrabCAD is usually more engineering based. There's a lot of things, like for instance, if you search something like an engine, you have 271 pages tagged with engine. So lots of mechanical stuff here. So if that's what you're after, go to grabcad.com, check that out. And finally, Dimensiva, a relatively new website. They are only putting out the highest quality models, I think, that are offered up for free by the artists or people who have rights to these models. They're almost all modern home furnishings, interiors, that type of thing. So if that's something that you're looking for, check out dimensiva.com. It's a fantastic website with really great models. So I think I picked in pulled items from all these different websites before creating my latest image that I just showed you. And we will open that up in KeyShot 6 beta. I should also mention this, KeyShot 6 is not quite officially out yet, but it will be very soon. So keep an open eye for that. Also, if you upgrade to KeyShot 5, or if you buy it, I believe, you get KeyShot 6 for free when the upgrade becomes available. Oops. So the first thing, obviously, once you've kind of decided what type of an image you want to create and you've either downloaded or created your geometry, something I would like to mention that I do is that I organize my scene and create a project folder. So you can see this one here I had called KeyShot 6 Render Contest Entry. And you can see there's a lot of items in here. And this way everything is self-contained within the folder. So if you want to use certain bits of geometry or image maps or textures or have reference images, pretty much anything, keep it in one folder related to your project, and that will help you and your workflow stay nice and organized. So the first thing that I did then was open up my models in KeyShot. So I opened the interior, and then after that I imported all of the individual models I wanted to include. So I will do basic. Something also worth mentioning is that when you are setting up your scene and you want KeyShot to run nice and quickly, but you're not concerned about textures or anything like that, especially because when you import models, for me, I always import OBJs, which do not come in with any textures or colors on them. I make sure I'm in basic lighting mode, and that just gives you kind of a base minimum, very low settings, and that will ensure that your computer runs a little bit faster. The other thing I will do is change our lens. See, we're at a 20 mil, very, very wide lens. Let's go to 50 just to make this a little more normal looking. And I'm going to zoom all the way out so you can see what I'm working with here. And I'm going to restore some very basic settings just so you can see the process again. So this box that you're seeing, we'll even put the basic startup environment in here. Okay, so this is kind of what we might see with, obviously without the textures when you start out. So this is a fully enclosed room, and if you go over to the scene tree here and I select a wall, I can turn off some of these walls, and that way we can see into the model much better, and the ceiling as well, I should mention. Now you can see your lights getting into the scene, and it's nice and easy to work with. So this is generally what I start by doing, and then I'll import my models, and I will just start organizing them throughout the scene to kind of create a composition that I think will work for my rendering. So in this case, I did not want to render out an image of this entire studio space. I just chose a little corner of it in order to, basically because I didn't have tons of time to get this image made, and I wanted to ensure that I had time to texture everything properly. One of the first things that I do also is I begin organizing my scene tree, and basically you want to make sure you've named everything appropriately so it makes it easy to navigate, so you understand what you're looking at here. And here, if I expand this, you can kind of see I've broken things into similar categories. So for instance, there's a lot of like duct work and kind of these pipes that make this room rugged. So for instance, if I search vents here and I toggle all of these on, oops, I've locked them, that's why. So that's actually a new KeyShot 6 feature, is hide and lock, which is nice. So you don't accidentally change something that you don't want to. But you see after I turn these on, these vents are now showing, and similarly, these pipes here are all showing, and you can, it's nice, you can search by title. So you can see on the left hand here, all these pipe pieces, I left their default blue color after importing them. And after I textured everything else, since these were broken into many little pieces, I waited till I textured everything else, then I clicked on an object and I right clicked and I selected, where is it? So select parts with material. So this is going to be, this will select everything with the same material on it. And you see how it selected this entire pipe assembly, which had lots of different pieces. And when I had originally opened this model, instead of those saying pipe, it said some string of numbers, something unintelligible. So I would, with all those selected, then I went down here on the properties tab here and I named them all the same thing, pipe, and that's how I can keep them organized and know quickly what they are. So that's just a little workflow thing that I do. You know, you don't have to, but I find it makes it easy. And then, so anything that also you're not going to include in your scene, you might as well hide. So we'll go back to the vents here, and when I select them all, I can right click and do hide and lock. So it turns them off and it prevents them from being messed with down the road, which is a great little feature. Something else, another tip as far as efficient workflow goes. So KeyShot has a cool feature called patterning or instancing. And what it does is it duplicates geometry, but well, it doesn't technically duplicate it. It creates an instance which is like a representation of the original piece of geometry. And the reason I say it doesn't actually duplicate the geometry is because if you create a pattern, your file size does not increase. It doesn't actually make a copy of all the triangles that the geometry is made up of. Hopefully that makes sense. But the reason I bring this up is you can see these lights here in the ceiling, these ceiling lights, and when I open this model, this interior that I got from TurboSquid, it had these 6 lights, but they were one solid object. Like, they weren't broken into pieces that I could add materials to. And the reason that's kind of an issue is because I wanted these lights to actually be functional. Since this is a fully enclosed room, I wanted to be able to apply a light material to the light bulb inside the light here. I'll show you. So it's actually, in this case, turned off. So if I want to turn this light on, you can see when I click on that, now this light bulb shows up, and this is actually adding light to the scene. So what was really awesome in this case was that KeyShot 6 has a geometry editor built into it, which I've done a blog post on in the past, but it doesn't go into a ton of depth. In this case, this whole lighting assembly was one piece. So when I added a light material, it turned the whole thing into light, which is not at all what we wanted. So what I did is I deleted all of the other lights in the scene, except for this one, and I used the geometry editor to break this into multiple pieces. So when you right click on an object in the scene tree, you get the edit geometry option. So this is what I would click on, and then it gives you options. Split into surfaces or objects, edit normals or close mesh. So in this case, we wanted to take a piece of geometry and break it into other pieces. I began by split separate objects, and that really only broke this into, I think, like 2 or 3 pieces, and it still didn't separate out everything I wanted. So after that, I did split object surfaces, and then after doing that, I was able to get the results I wanted, which left me with separate pieces for this glass, for the light bulb, the cord, this light fixture piece, the screws that we have here. So at that point, we had broken the lights into enough pieces that I could apply separate materials to everything. And once I did that and was happy with the results, I then created an instance or made a pattern using KeyShot's pattern feature, which all I had to do was right click on the light and select make pattern. And that is how I then ended up with 6 of these ceiling lights, all with the exact materials applied, and without, actually, I think it made the file size smaller by deleting out the original geometry and using a pattern of lights instead of actually having geometry for each of those. And so that is a feature of KeyShot's that you can take advantage of. It's not necessarily a new feature. The edit geometry feature is new, but the pattern feature is not. And anytime you have multiple pieces of multiple parts that you want duplicated or patterned, you can do so. And the nice thing about a pattern feature too is it helps in placing these. I just basically I took my camera and told it to give me a top view of my model or my scene, and I was able to adjust the settings in the pattern to place these lights exactly where I wanted them. So after we had done that, it was basically time to make a decision about the scene that I wanted to render out. So I started kind of composing the scene, moving the geometry around, and in order to kind of come up with a little bit more clear of or more specific idea of what I wanted this to look like, I went online and I grabbed images and I added them to my project folder, so I had something to reference. So for instance here, if you look at my reference images folder, I've got some for bricks, I've got some for leather, because that leather chair was a focal point in my rendering. And then if I open these up, you can kind of see these are some images of industrial lofts that I grabbed from the internet, something that fit the aesthetic or the mood or the color palette that I was after. Some are renderings, some are images. It doesn't really matter in this case since these were just a reference. I wasn't, copying anything from here or trying to reproduce it, just kind of for ideas and inspiration. And like here you can see I was inspired by the way these lights cast the shadows into the room. So that was something I incorporated into my scene. I think this image had a color palette that I wanted to reproduce in my image too. So that's kind of how I use these. And in some cases too, just deciding on what furniture to put where and how to compose the image and what color to make things, that's really helpful. So that's another thing I recommend that you do. And that's a way to increase the believability of your renderings if you use good reference images. So now our scene's looking a little clearer because we've let it res up a little bit in the real-time render. I think another feature of KeyShot 6 may be this samples thing here. So in your little dashboard that you have up, it as it renders in real time, it tells you how many samples you're viewing it at. So if your real-time render is actually looking sharp and good the way you want it, and the sample says like, I don't know, 100 or something, then you know if you're rendering out in max samples setting that you may only need to go up to 100 to get the results you want. Something to consider. I also wanted to mention too a cool feature. So if you're ever having trouble zooming in on something, just right click on the object and select look at. It will center the model, so then you can use your scroll wheel on your mouse to zoom in. So something worth mentioning here, I think, is another feature of the KeyShot 6, the new version of KeyShot, is their move tool has a nice little scale feature and is improved in a number of ways. So in this book that I created here, I'll actually show you by double clicking it. You can see I've got this label put on it, which is kind of how I got the cover, and I can turn that off right now. And then I applied a texture along the side of the pages. Here on the left you can see this diffuse type texture that I added to, it kind of has these horizontal stripes that make the geometry look like pages without modeling any pages, obviously. So this book is actually bigger than this and a square when I imported it. And what I had done to make all these books was, again, in my project folder, I have a folder of book covers. So I went online and found covers of some of my favorite books by Stephen King or George Orwell, Ray Bradbury, and basically found these book covers that had the front, the spine, and the back of the book, and made sure they were nice high-res images. In some cases I had to scale them up, but I saved those up to 2,000 pixels across. And then I applied those as labels, as you can see here. So the book, which I mentioned was more square in some cases, when I put the label on, may not have actually fit height and width wise. So what I would do is I would use the move tool now. Depending on whether you're familiar with this or not, we now have in the new KeyShot 6 a move tool that has a circle on the X, Y, and Z axis. And then if you have the scale option ticked off in your little nav window down here, it gives you the option to scale in X, Y, and Z, or scale in X, Y, or Z individually with these little squares. And the reason this is awesome is because, so like if I pull out this one right here, you'll see the book will get wider without affecting the other two dimensions. And let's say I want to make the book thicker, I can just pull on this one here, and the book will actually get thicker, and I can hit OK. And in many cases, our book's going through our geometry. So another thing we can do is pull it up above the table and just click Snap to Lower Object. And all of a sudden, our book is on the table, and we have not had to move our camera and wasted time trying to move the book down millimeter by millimeter. Another KeyShot 6 feature. But now, as we mentioned, we've changed the dimensions of the book, and if I turn the label back on, you'll see here it still fits. So what's kind of interesting is if you apply a label and then you scale the book or the item, the label will stretch to accommodate, which is kind of interesting. So what I had done is I tried to just eyeball the book scaling beforehand, and then I would apply the label, and here you can see it's, it's I've scaled it up a little bit in the y-axis, and I've kind of moved it around using these coordinates here to get the label of the book or the book cover in the right position. And I set it to UV coordinates. It's not 100% perfect, but you know, it still works. And I just noticed this, sorry, I can see I made those changes to the cover of the book, but not the actual pages here. So we've kind of messed this whole thing up here, but you know, as long as you're careful about what you've selected when you start scaling it and everything, then you should be good. Just wanted to make mention of how I ended up putting these covers on all these books and making sure the size fit. Again, using the Move tool in KeyShot 6 allows you to scale geometry, which makes something like this really, really easy and fast to do. So the next major thing worth mentioning here is the lighting. So right now we have, actually I have this little light on, that's why you have this orange glow here showing in the corner. And I should mention too, you're seeing all this noise and, you know, kind of blockiness because I have lots of textures applied throughout here. It's 3.5 million triangles in the scene, so not a ton, but just there's a lot of parameters I've turned on and materials I've applied. So you know, don't let this scare you. You know, KeyShot does run nice and quickly. You only start to see stuff like this when you're close to completing your scene, at least in my experience. So the next thing worth mentioning is that I like to set up my lighting, since I knew that was going to be a very big component to this rendering. So when we go to our environment here, we have the startup HDR. I, as well as many people, always recommend that you stay away from leaving the startup environment or scene if you want to have a lot more control and believability brought to your a scene. It's just, it makes for a much better image in the end. So what you can do if you have, I think it might be KeyShot Pro maybe required, but if you go to the HDRI editor, you can modify an existing scene, add or an HDR. You can add pins of different colors and sizes and shapes or whatever. Or you can do a sun and sky setup, which is what I did. And I don't want to get too in depth into this. I could do another video on creating custom environments on a different date. But what I will do is show you how to generate a new environment, so or a new HDR image using the sun and sky, which is cool. So for instance, I chose somewhere that I was familiar with, such as like Chicago maybe, or let's say Detroit. I used to live in Detroit. And the reason I say choosing a location you're familiar with is like you can kind of understand what the lighting and the sun is like in that area. And then, for instance, I wanted something that was in the summertime, so you know, I chose July 2016. That's fine. This is kind of funny. I've noticed this is actually a little finicky. You can use your arrow key. Sometimes it doesn't save, so you just hit tab to move down to the next item. And then time of day, this is goes full 24 hours. So in June, you know, the sun's going to be up in the sky later. Maybe we want this to be something like 7 o'clock, which, you know, is going to put us at what, 19? You'll have to forgive me, I don't use military time too often. And then we'll hit generate HDRI and see what it looks like. This will warn you that you're going to lose your settings. Totally fine. And so this happens to be in that location, that time of year, very late sunset. Let's make this not quite so late. Maybe 16:27. Let's regenerate the HDRI. Let's say don't show again. Yes. Okay, much better. So with this, we'll go ahead and close this dialog box, and now you can see we've got beautiful light streaming into the room, casting some very dramatic shadows, very kind of cinematic, which is exactly what I was going for when I set the scene up or thought of it originally. The other thing I guess worth mentioning, you can go ahead and actually edit this and do more further customization. And in my case, I really wanted to make it warmer and a little more stylized, and so I brought some color into it by upping the saturation quite a bit. Value, and we'll close this again. And now you can see we've got more of a yellow light coming into the room, which is, you know, it's a lot moodier, it's a lot cooler. And if you want to go further, you can add image pins to your HDRI to kind of further manipulate, and that's exactly what I ended up doing. I used my backplate as an image pin as well because I wanted it to be a little more correct, bring some of the tones and colors in from my image. So with this set up like this, now I would like to show you when you turn the walls back on in the ceiling. I'll just search for walls here, show those, and our ceiling. Here we are. Okay, so now we're outside the room. We can't see in, it's sealed off. We don't have light leaking in from our HDRI. So now at this point, I'm going to zoom in through the wall, and we may need to go to a wider lens in order to view our scene without it being too tight. Okay. So this isn't so bad. I might make it a little bit wider here in a minute. The other thing I want to mention is, so we went to the trouble to make a pattern of those indoor lights. So I would like to show you what results we can get from those. So if I go to the top of my scene tree, which is where I have all those lights, so you can see lights here. If I expand every one of the ceiling light tabs, you'll notice that the light bulb, where I've basically applied the light material to, it's turned off on every one of them because I wanted a little bit more contrast of the lights and darks in the room. But we can obviously toggle all of those on, and you can see how they brighten up the entire room pretty significantly. And since I've linked all of those materials, if I change the brightness or the color or any of the settings on one of those lights, it will affect all of them. And again, that's a nice way to just kind of fine-tune the lighting of your environment using a few linked ceiling lights or something like that. And it got a little whiter because the color of those lights are not they don't match the yellow of the light coming in the room. And this little lamp here, it's a very light, it's a very yellow light that I've set there. So, thinking about kind of the hues and the colors and the warmth of the lighting that you have in the room may affect your overall image, something just to consider. Now at this point, I would like to mention something that you've probably heard about, and it's called the material graph in KeyShot 6. It's a new feature that opens up a lot of possibilities when it comes to adding materials and textures and colors, and basically making something look the way you see it in your head or the way you want it to actually look like. So when I click on the material graph here, which is like a new button that you'll see on your materials now, you have a visual representation of all the components of that are affecting the overall look of the material itself. So when you click on the parent material, basically the one furthest on the right hand side, you get the same settings, adjustments that you're used to with, say, KeyShot 5 or 4. You still have your main properties, your textures, and your labels tab. But now what you have in addition here as you move to the left is you get more specific. So you can see here our textures is the diffuse, specular, and bump are all the same here, and you can see them all plugged in to the material on the right. And by clicking on each one of these, you can set individual settings or parameters. You can choose to sync them up or not. And then the labels that I've added now are, instead of one label on one part, we've got 2 or 3 here. It looks like I have one of them turned off now. But you can layer them all on the same object, and that's what I've done. And basically what I did is I added one, which was this. I added one texture and then played with it, you know, turned the opacity on it down and kind of played with the settings until I got the results I wanted. And then I added another, which was like a dark stains. And then again, I kind of textured that down, which for me, who's used to Photoshop, being able to turn the opacity down on a layer, that's exactly how I envision this. Think of each of these as layers. And then again, you can use opacity maps if you want to, or you can, you know, think of each of these channels as like adjustments within Photoshop or adjustment layers or things. So very cool, lots of flexibility. And something I would like to mention as far as being able to work. So obviously my real-time renderer is only going up to maybe 6 samples. It's not enough to give me a clear indication of how this is going to look. So if I go back to my original camera here that I rendered with, let's go back to this one. Okay. So we're back with, you know, wider lens and all that stuff, and we've got our chair in front of us. We can let it res up, but it's going to take a long time. So what I do instead is I go to render, and I do a region render, which is a perfect, you know, feature. Again, not new to KeyShot 6, but something I think probably a pro feature. This allows you to choose just a section of your image to render out. And the reason you would do this is, let's say you don't want to wait for the entire thing to render out. You just want to verify a portion of it, or see if your material's looking good yet. What I do is I like to go to a region render. Just go ahead and set your format to JPEG. We don't need all the other passes or anything. Resolution, maybe drop it to 3000 or something, and then go to your options and set your maximum time. So this way you're not guessing at how long it's going to take. Let's say you only want to give it 3 minutes. Go ahead and hit render. This says we haven't, you know, we've changed our HDRI. We'll save it. We'll just save it as a test. Here's the other thing. So this is by default looking in my KeyShot project folder. In my experience, you want to make sure you're saving things like environments in the right place. So go to your documents, into your KeyShot folder, and then make sure you save it in the right location. So I've gone to environments, I've gone to outdoor, and then I'll just name this video test because I'm not going to save this. Hit enter. Sometimes if you save your environments in a location other than where KeyShot knows where to look for it, you can have some trouble there. So now that I've done that, this is rendering out our region render, and let's do 100% view. For some reason we're okay. Let's try that again. Got some weirdness going on there. Let me look at my, here's why. I gave it a resolution of 300. That was my fault. Sorry, everybody. 3000. Let's see how that looks. And we'll do the render in background again. Here we go. And now in this case, here we go. So here's our chair and it's rendering out. Now, the other thing worth mentioning is we have not changed our settings outside of the basic settings. So our image settings, I will show you what I mean in a second. So obviously this is not going to look that great because of the settings that I have within KeyShot. So what I was talking about was when you click on your lighting settings, we still have it set up to basic. When you get to the point of texturing and dialing in your textures and your lighting and everything, you're gonna want these settings turned up a bit higher. At least that's what I do. So we'll go ahead and go back to our output, deselect region render, otherwise that little box will stay there. We're gonna unpause this so our scene sets back up, and then I'll click on the interior mode because that's the big fancy new, one of the most anticipated and well-received features of KeyShot 6. As you can see, it's all of a sudden it's starting to res up a lot faster and look a lot better. I can go ahead and turn on caustics, ground illumination, global illumination. I'll crank up my bounces to, I don't know, 36, indirect 24, and shadow quality 5. These are all very high settings, but we'll let it sit for a minute and you'll see how it starts to res up and look a lot cleaner than it would if you didn't have that interior rendering mode. So this will both treat and respect physical lights as well as the light coming in from the HDRI a lot better as well. Now you're probably looking at the windows and going like, okay, so what do you do about that? When we go over to our environment tab, we can choose to have a backplate image. I used a backplate image in this scene for a while. I just used a stock image that I pulled from the internet. I don't have rights to it, so I didn't use it or publish it. But it allows you to just kind of get an idea for what things are going to look like. Ultimately, in the end, I added my back plate or my image from the environment in Photoshop. I did that all in post, and I did that mostly because I've got this glass jar here, and had I rendered this out with the transparency of the jar, you would still get these buildings kind of showing through. When I changed my backplate to the one I was going to use, I'll show you here what happens. So Sunset 1 backplate, this is one that I took a photo of with my camera, then I made my adjustments. I bring it in and you'll see that it doesn't place the sun necessarily exactly where I want it. And I had spent a bunch of time setting up my KeyShot scene, so I didn't want to go around scaling, moving everything. So you notice with the sun being here, it's too low to be casting the shadows that are coming into this room. That would need to be a lot higher. So I decided just to add that image in post. It's not that difficult. The only thing I really lost out on was some of the image, the transparency of this glass. I didn't quite get as much detail there. So anyway, to do my final rendering, we could add, like I think I've kind of gone through my basic steps. This is very abbreviated, of course. I can't show you literally everything, or we'd be sitting here for days. But that's kind of how I worked on building up the scene, what I thought about, what I considered, and then just doing the region renders as I showed you on each bit to make sure I was dialed in without doing a full-on render. Again, because I didn't have a lot of time to achieve all of this. And so the last thing I want to mention is when I went to do my final render, My export, I did it like something bigger than I needed to. I did 6,000, 6K, I think. And then I did an export of PSD 32-bit, and I did all render passes, and I did add to PSD, and I had even had a render layer for these windows. You can see when you click on this, I had dirty windows as another render layer. So I selected add render layers too, and that ensured that it rendered out these windows on a separate layer, because I knew I was going to be doing some work on the windows and I wanted as much freedom as I could. So with that, I went to my options for my output. I set it to, I think, 5 hours on this last image. And I just hit render and I let it alone. I made sure I wasn't running a bunch of programs while it was rendering. That was just to give KeyShot as much extra oomph as possible. Even though it is a CPU-based render, it helps if you don't have a bunch of stuff using RAM at the same time. So we'll close this now. We're not going to save it. And I'll just quickly run through what I did in Photoshop to arrive at my final image. So what you're looking at here is the output. The setting I had on the windows was I used the environment, like the HDRI, instead of a backplate or white, because that way I got some tones inside this glass vase that would pretty much match my backplate. And so you can see here as I zoom in, like, this is a very high resolution image. You know, you've got this leather texture that looks nice. You've got the piping, concrete wall, this photo frame. You've got, this was something I could have never done without the material graph, was this painted over brick texture. The books that I've got there, you know, all these little models, you know, it came together pretty well. This fabric pillow. Lots of different cool textures and materials. So as I zoom out, what I did first was I always make a duplicate of my main image just in case I want to go back to it, my raw render. And then, so as I turn on this first image, you can see some of the changes I made right away are in this corner. I darkened this up, and I kind of roughed up the edges here, trying to make this, see where the wall meets this other wall. It's a sharp line instead of there being any definition or shape. I kind of just made that a little more rugged, more believable, where the bricks kind of meet the wall. I adjusted some lighting, made it a little bit brighter. These edges of this table here were blown out a little bit. I didn't like the way this looked, so I kind of darkened those up a little bit. Nothing too crazy there. The next major thing I did was I added the backplate. So this makes a huge difference, obviously. So I created I placed my image, then I created a clipping mask using the windows, the dirty windows render layer that I mentioned, those white ones. I selected those, and you'll see here too, in order to get the tree showing behind the glass vase here, I basically just chopped the vase off. Then I did some magic, basically copied the scene, deleted everything but the vase, and dropped the opacity and played with that a little bit until it looked fairly reasonably realistic. Not the smoothest way to do that, but again, given the time I had, that was my solution. Up here, I wanted to add some volumetric lighting, kind of an atmospheric effect, so I added this light glow, which is very subtle, or a beam of light. Then I added the light glow around it, which again, very much stylizes it, but I kind of like it, you know, it's personal preference. I added a glow down here around this prism, just very, very subtle. And then you can see I added a lens flare here I'll turn on, and again, you can barely see it, but it's coming in through there. We had a normals and a clown pass, which were exported from KeyShot. I use those when I need to select something. Again, same thing with the dirty windows. And then dust. Again, you can barely see this, so I'll zoom in the light here. This is probably the best. So when you're inside and you've got light coming into a room, dust will be illuminated. When I turn the dust on now, see how you can see these little flecks of dust here? So they actually add a level of realism. Now that we're zoomed out a bit, you can see them. They're kind of all over here. And then as we zoom out further, you really can't see them, but they're there. And we'll look at the coffee steam because, yep, I added that too. I thought that was very necessary. And then I did a photo filter, so we'll zoom back out. Photo filter makes everything just a touch more orange, barely. It's very subtle. So at this point, I collapsed all those into a group, and I made a copy of those, which I'll turn on here. Oh, the other thing I should mention is I used, so in my channels, you can see this alpha layer, this alpha mask. I exported a depth of field pass, which I used to create depth of field. So when you're back here in my final, my top image, I used that and I applied it. So now we've got depth of field with our focal point, this highlight on this chair, which is kind of, again, what I wanted the eye to focus on. And then you can see as you move toward the background, things get blurred as they get further away from the camera, also known as the depth of field, just to add another sense of more realistic, you know, kind of also to guide the eye. You know, I've turned the windows on. I figured maybe they're dirty, so they've got this kind of a film on them, kind of, you know, it just lightens things up a little bit, desaturates them a bit, more realistic in my mind. Then I added exposure adjustment, kind of brought up the exposure of the gamma a little bit so we could see a bit more. And color balance, did some basic grading, pushed the darks toward the blues and the lights toward the yellows a little bit. And that's really everything I did. The only feature I did not cover in KeyShot, which I will open and show you real quick, is this is a very wide image, like 20 millimeters maybe. And you'll notice all the verticals, they don't diverge or converge. They're all actually vertical. The only way to achieve that is with a shift lens. That's what a lot of people use on a camera to shoot architectural buildings in a wide angle. KeyShot 6 has a new feature that allows you to do that, and it's worth showing you. So I'll go back into KeyShot. Thanks for your patience. We'll open the model we were just looking at, or the scene, rather. And I will turn off the shift lens feature so you can see what it would look like without it. Hopefully that will work. Let me try creating a new camera or a view set here. Test. So we'll move things around. Let's do an ultra wide angle just to try to exaggerate this point a little bit. Okay, so right now you're seeing how these verticals are converging, meaning the further away they get from you, the higher up they go. We'll even make it more extreme. We'll do 10. The higher up they go, the closer they get to each other. This creates this super distorted effect. But let's say we wanted this rendering to be this wide for some reason. We'll turn on the shift feature, and you'll notice it will work as soon as I click. So if you actually know how much you want it to shift horizontally, vertically, you can put those in. If you're not a photographer, if you don't have experience with that, you're probably better off just choosing the estimate vertical shift button, which I did. So I click that and look at these verticals. See how they straighten back out? It's almost like they smashed our scene in a way that gives us what we want. Now you will notice some major distortion toward the corners, especially here on the coffee table and the edges of the chair and stuff. So obviously we wouldn't want to render something out at a 10 millimeter focal length, but in my case I did one at 20 and it looked fairly okay. You know, 30 maybe a little bit better. But just to illustrate a point, the vertical shift button for anybody, or feature rather, for anybody doing architectural renderings is going to be a very big feature. You know, definitely something you'll want to take advantage of. And at this point, I think we're going to conclude this video. I don't know how long it's been running, probably way longer than any of you care to hear me talk for. So I thank you if you've hung in this long. Again, I want to remind you to check out, if you don't mind, check out my website, willgibbonsdesign.com. Thank you for checking this video out, and I will talk to you later.